Welcome, everyone. We are now recording, and
that'll be great for the people who couldn't be here. Thank you.
This is a gathering of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, US, to have a chance to hear from our candidates for board positions and to ask them questions and to learn more about the proposed bylaws amendment, which is, I would say, no big deal. It is wonderful to have people here to hear from our candidates, and it's wonderful to have candidates. These are pretty demanding times. I don't think I need to persuade anyone of that. We have so many serious issues in the world today that it's great that people are making time to come to this event, because it is about the future of WILPF. Each board member adds their own character and their own goals and hopes and aspirations and vision to the board that we have. And I'm very appreciative to George Friday and Barbara Nielsen for being willing to apply to run for the board. So yes, thank you, Donna. And I will just mention something that will come up again later in the presentation. We had a number of board positions open. I frankly haven't counted them lately, but it was maybe 7, 6, and we have 2 candidates. So that's a matter of concern for how will WILPF continue as an organization, and where will we find ways to reduce the workload on board members so that more people feel ready to run for the board, and those on the board are able to fully participate in WILPF, which is something I'd like to do more of. So without too much further ado, I want to welcome everyone to this gathering and tell people about what the program is for tonight. We will start off hearing from the 2 candidates. Barbara Nielsen is running for treasurer, and George Friday is running for program committee chair. Sometimes people are confused about the fact that we have 2 program committee chairs. Jennifer Bailey is currently the other program committee chair, and that particular office is empty at this time. We will hear from the candidates' opening statements, then we'll be open to questions. You may post your questions into the chat, or just to Diane, and well, best to put them in the chat, but you are welcome to just post them to Diane, who is going to be the one who will be monitoring the questions in the chat. And at about 12:30, we will switch over to talking about the bylaws amendments. We will also have time for people to ask any general questions about the ballot packet and the election itself, but that will be at the end. So excuse me for one moment while I prepare to introduce the candidates. I'm trying to find my notes, I beg your pardon. Okay. So Diane Blay is our secretary, and she will, well, I'm sorry, one more moment. The joys of technology. All of the people you will hear from tonight are remarkably credentialed with a lot of experience. We have Diane, our secretary, who has years of experience in the League of Women Voters and in a number of other organizations, very active locally in Washington, D.C. Cheryl Spencer is the Disarm Committee co-chair, working with Ellen Thomas. She has had a distinguished career in physics and continues to be active in organizing conferences for her physics association. George Friday has been on the boards of numerous organizing and political organizations, and will tell us more about herself via her resume, which is posted on our candidates webpage. And Diane, I wonder if I could ask you to put the URL for that candidates webpage in the chat. That was with the questions. Also, on that webpage, you will find the resume or activist bios for both candidates, as well as their letters of recommendation, nomination, and their applications. So the other candidate we'll hear from tonight is Barbara Nielsen, running for treasurer, which is also the finance chair. Barbara is a life member of WILF US. She's been on the board in different positions before. So without further ado, I would like to go ahead and invite the two candidates to briefly provide an opening statement. These statements are coming to everyone who's a current WILF member via US mail. They are also posted on that webpage. Okay, George, you're first, and because these statements are available elsewhere, candidates, let's present a minute about themselves.
Oh,
thank you,
okay.
George.
So I'm really glad that you'll be able to read my candidate statement online, and thanks, Diane, for putting that in the chat. I wanted to share a little bit about what may not be in that statement and why I can bring the process and skills to the board that I talk about in my statement. The best correlation to the work that we'll do here in WILF was work that I did in Chatham County, North Carolina, with a program called Safe Start, where I was the program director, and my responsibility was to bring together folks from different agencies, the health department, Department of Social Services, the Sheriff's Department, to work for a shared vision. Now, they didn't necessarily have the same worldview. They didn't necessarily have the same priorities, but they did care and have a foundation to build on, as we do at WILF, as feminist peacemakers. And I was able to ask the right questions and synthesize some different thinking into effective programs and programming. And I think we can do that here with our committee work. So I bet that's a minute.
You got it. Thank you so much. And excellent. Barbara, we would be happy to hear from you now. Barbara, running for treasurer. Barbara Nielsen.
That is my name. I thank you all very much for being here. I hope that we will continue to have more people come online, including some people who said that they were trying to be here but had difficulty in getting on for some reason. I can tell you this as soon as the right page comes up on my screen. I apologize. If elected, this will be the second time that I will be serving in this position as treasurer and finance committee chair. I was elected before by our members for the 2008 term. And back at the time when we took our positions at the triennial congresses, which at that year was in Des Moines, Iowa. I've served since as nominating committee chair and in a number of other positions.
Barbara, excuse me. This was for 1 minute. Do you want to just wrap up in 10 seconds and you'll have a chance to say more when you're answering questions?
I will be glad to do that. Hold on a second. It is difficult not being able to have things in front of me. It's going back and forth. I apologize. I'm very glad to be running as chair. I'm very glad that, as chair of the Finance Committee and treasurer, and very happy that the current treasurer thinks I'd be a good treasurer too. Thank you very much for your participation here.
Thank you, Barbara. Great.
I'm sorry. Excuse me, yeah. I'm sorry, but I'm on this thing. I don't know where this stuff is. How do you find it from the website? I've read it myself.
If you click on the link.
I already put it in the chat.
Oh, you did? I'm
Yes,
supposed to be monitoring the chat.
because I had it open on my, I have them all open on my desk. on
Oh,
my
good.
computer.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Because okay. Good.
I appreciate the teamwork. Great. Oh, okay, thank you for those opening statements. And Diane, you'll let me know in a bit. We'll start with the basic questions for both candidates. And then as other questions may come in, and we also have questions that have been sent out to the candidates. So starting with the basic candidate questions. And for these, you have only, you have 1.5 minutes for each one was what I originally suggested, but having seen that it's pretty hard for you to say sufficiently in 1.5 minutes, shall we increase that to 2 minutes? Or George and Barbara, I'm sorry, what do you think? Neither of you commented on this.
I can go for 90 seconds, and if I need 30, I can ask for more.
Okay.
Sure.
That sounds like a good plan. Okay, the first question for both candidates. For several years, there have not been candidates for several board positions. Please explain why you think this is the case. And since there may be several positions appointed by board members, what criteria will you use to fill them? And since we heard first from George before, Barbara, you are first.
Well, thank you. You're asking us to become divinationists. We make our decisions on the board largely by consensus, even if the actual vote is a vote. I look forward to working collegially with other members of the existing board carrying forward. We do not have very strongly defined criteria. I think that this is an issue that we will all learn from and look forward to figuring out how to be creative going forward.
Thank you. George, do you want the question repeated or not?
I think I've got it. Well, I hope and think that our board members come from our members and branches. So step one is strengthening our branches and getting more people active. I think part of the issue is our current folks are tired and being on the board is more work. If you're active locally, as most of people are, you know, some of y'all may have been doing things for elections last weekend and Monday and Tuesday, and we're up late. And then you think about that kind of effort at least 3 or 4 times a year to get more members involved. And from those members, we can have more board members. Criteria I would use to choose additional board members, I would look at our strengths and our gaps. I'm an asset-based planner, so I think we build on what works and we try to mitigate what isn't working. So I would have that attitude about identifying potential board members as well.
Thank you. And again, to both candidates, this time, George, how do you distinguish program expenditures from general support funding, since you'll be program chair?
I would think of program expenditures in the way one would a campaign expense. A campaign has a defined term or a defined goal. A program that a committee has initiated and is doing, or a subcommittee or a work group, what is its goal? And if an expenditure is attached to accomplishing that goal, you've got speakers, you've got a venue, you've got promotional materials. If it's a finite expense, then that's the expense. Our general support expenses are long-term. That's what maintains our health, physical health, or just the day-to-day of the organization. So those are the ways I would distinguish the difference.
Thank you. And now the same question, Barbara, for you as treasurer. How do you distinguish how would you distinguish, anyway, do program expenditures from general support funding?
Well, we have a structure in our budget that already does that in many ways, and have categories that have already had those definitions set forth, which does not mean that we don't analyze every time we get a request for funding, or we look at a new kind of expenditure of where we would characterize it. Certainly program actions and expenses wind up being something that has the program committee chair or chairs involved in it too at the board level. But George gave a very good overview of the basics on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to questions for individual candidates, starting again with George. As program chair, in recent years, WILPF as a volunteer organization has less visibility as part of the peace movement. Do you believe that WILPF should participate in coalitions? What coalitions work would you champion? And of course, related to that is coalition work a way to gain visibility for WILPF? Thank you.
Thank you for that. Well, my background has a lot of peace and justice organizations connected. I myself worked for United for Peace and Justice, which is a network, not a coalition. And I think WILPF creates its visibility by being more active within the peace movement, which is faltering, if not failed, in the US, frankly. So part of what WILPF can do to have more visibility is to be active in those coalitions that support the program work we're doing in our committees. So Disarm, I see Cheryl at the Peace in Ukraine meetings, or the No to NATO coalition meeting. And one coalition that would fit our work that is a peace coalition, but not UFPJ, is UNAC, the United, I'm not remembering what UNAC stands for, y'all, but I know that they're more in keeping with WILPF than any other similar collection of people. And it's a true coalition, and there aren't that many other genuine coalitions. Peace in Ukraine is one. No to NATO is not quite a coalition, but there are opportunities for us to be active, and by doing the work, we gain visibility. That's it.
Thank you very much. And returning now to Barbara, there's a long-standing WILPF policy from about November 2009 that limits how much of a bequest may be spent in the subsequent 3 years. How do you feel WILPF US should use bequest funds? And any comments on that policy?
Well, we actually adopted the policy in January of 2007 and updated a few times. And the intention of it at the time, historically, was not only to honor the all of the bequests and what they wanted done with their money, but also to operate within a reasonable budget on an annual basis nationally without having to rely on using bequests all the time to save the operations of the organization. So the bequest savings policy wound up being a certain percentage is set aside, and it goes through a whole bunch of hoops. I think it's a great policy. It gives us an opportunity on an ongoing basis to remember that we have an obligation to bring in active money and not wait for people to die to give us money. Because if you wait around for people to die and they don't die, then you don't have money. And we, in 2007, determined that wasn't the way to go. So this is an interesting policy. It's still in place. It's being updated and used. And I think Jan Korterman, as our treasurer the last 6 years, has worked very well with the Finance Committee on that policy, as well as the rest of the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. And your next question coming up will be related to that. So maybe people have more things to think about there. Going back to George, before 2007, WILF members at the Congress used to vote on options for priorities for our national work. We then sought to work on those, and we had staff to support such work. A lot has changed since then. Given the changes in WILF, what would you do to strengthen WILF's mission?
I think I mentioned before, strengthening WILF depends on bringing in new members, building branches, those branches being active, having ideally at least 3 actions or events a year, and then we get more people involved. And that grows. It sustains the organization so that it's around another 50, 7,500 years.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And Barbara, that related question I mentioned, the Treasurer's report for 2021, which was available and still is in the 2022 summer edition of the Peace and Freedom magazine, we received $352,736 in bequests in 2021. Has some of that been invested in the stock or bond market? Would you plan to make such investments while you are treasurer?
Well, actually, that seems to me to be a question that would be far more appropriate to have been asked of the current treasurer, since they have been, she and the Finance Committee have been dealing with it. There has been movement to invest money from those bequests. I cannot give you details because I was not on the Finance Committee, and that wasn't my bailiwick at the time, but I have been very aware of the concern by the treasurer and the Finance Committee to make sure that that money is protected and available for us moving forward. Working also with our fiscal sponsor, the Peace Development Fund.
Thank you. I will remind everyone at this gathering, clearly we have over 20 people interested in what WILF does. The board meeting minutes are posted on the WILF website. If you look under contact, and board is one of the options, on that web page you will find the board minutes. Those minutes do contain the information that WILF US has invested in mutual funds, but not, as far as I know, any of the proceeds from bequests in 2022, because the stock market has been pretty wonky and we were afraid. We have other things in stocks, and an amount of the funds have been put into CDs to keep them preserved. Okay, sorry for that sideline, but people might want to know. And again, for the program chair, there are 2 program committee chairs. One was elected last year, Jennifer Bailey. Are you acquainted with her? How will you approach the process of sharing the responsibilities of leading the WILF program and the program committee with the other chair?
I am familiar with Jennifer Bailey. We're both in New York. I mean, New York, Lord. We're both in North Carolina, which I think is a plus. We can meet on Zoom, and I think our work as program committee chairs begins with a conversation about priorities, about the evaluation of her time to date, a projection of what is we expect going forward, and then we can have some conversations about priorities and division of labor, which of course we will come back and share with the board at a board meeting. It may take the form of just a proposal or just each sharing, here's how we're going to work together so that everyone knows, because transparency is important.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question for the treasurer, and then we will move on to to hearing about the bylaws proposal, and we'll have more time for questions afterwards if there aren't that many bylaws questions.
Do you want me to answer Margot's question in the chat?
Actually, that was the next question. I was just looking for that. How will you endeavor to make WILP financially secure in keeping with paragraph 14 of the International Code of Conduct?
Well, one of the things that the treasurer and as treasurer and chair of the finance committee does and has been doing for the last 6 years and before, but certainly Jan has been doing amazingly good work, is to work hand in glove with the chair of the development committee and the members of that committee, as well as the chair and members of the membership development committee. Because to make us financially secure means that we have to have ever-growing membership, and not just for membership dues, but also for the involvement of members, helping us seek financial resources, and growing the funds that we have prudently, as Darian pointed out, in the CDs and other things that she wanted to talk about in detail, which I had not thought we were going to, so I hadn't prepared much on it. And also looking for major donor fundraising, which we have some of that in place now, I understand, with 1, 2, or I believe 3 different people tasked with looking for that kind of funding. So we will be continuing to do work on that in that area. And thank you, Margot, for asking the question.
Thank you, Barbara. So at this point, we'll change focus for a little while and see if we have time for more questions afterwards. First, I wanted to invite any members who have specific questions about the ballot. The ballots, as I said earlier, are in the mail. They'll probably arrive at your home within the next 3 to 5 days. You have until November 28th to complete your ballot and send it in. Included with the ballot, you'll get a printed copy of the candidate's statements and information on the proposed bylaws change, both the specific language being changed and pages and pages of explanation that are friendly and easy to read, we hope. So if you have questions about the ballot packet, returning your ballot, etc., please put your question in the chat. And at this point, we'll keep an eye out for those and move on to the bylaws amendment. The amendment this year is a change in the language of the bylaws. And it looks like Barbara might be screen sharing the amendment language.
There we go.
Yeah, actually, if you would stop screen sharing for a moment, Barbara.
Sure. You were starting to talk about it. I thought it might help for people to be able to see what the packet looks like.
Okay, well, yes, that's what the packet looks like. Thank you. That is useful. It gives people a reference. It's just, I think folks will try to read it and that will get a little confusing. We'll put it up after we've heard some basic orientation, starting with Diane Blay. Would you tell us why you thought?
Okay, I wanted the bylaws changed, and so I ended up on the bylaws committee. But basically, the thing I didn't like when I looked through them was it referred so much to 2014. I'm going 2014, that was a while ago. Why is this in the bylaws? So I knew that it needed to be updated. So, you know, I just want things to be up to date. And actually, I don't know, you know, I really was looking for the statements of the candidates and I can't. And how did you get to story from the head, from the starter? Maybe somebody could explain that real quick, because I know the website, but Cheryl, how did you get to, or anybody?
Sorry, I had muted myself, of course. I would like to clarify that this web page that has the candidate information is a members only web page. It cannot be reached from the website unless you happen to know the URL. So that's why we put the URL in the chat, and I will go ahead and repeat it because that's easy to do. By going directly to the URL, you will be able to find the documents about the candidates. And
I didn't get it repeated, but I just didn't understand how everyone was supposed to know that. I guess maybe everyone knows it but me, but I wasn't that clear on it. I thought that there would be some way to find out from the website.
That's
okay,
intentionally not the case. So it's good to point that out so people know how to get there. That was in the e-alert that went out, and that's about the only way to get it.
Okay, so the e-alert can't just go, okay. But to get back to the bylaws, sorry for that. Yeah, so that was why just, you know, we had to get all that language cleaned up, and that's basically what the bylaws amendment's doing.
Okay, and Cheryl, if you'd like, you're going to be giving us a more detailed explanation of the amendment, and we can put up the relevant page from what's in the packet, or simply the item from the bylaws, excuse me, from the elections page that specifically gives a language. Or Cheryl, you're the one explaining.
Yes.
You may screen share.
Right, no, I wasn't going to screen share. I was going to talk.
Let me know if you want me to screen share, I can put it up.
Okay. I would not put up the 4-page to begin with. I would put up the actual amendment, because you will be receiving 2 documents, hard copy, pieces of paper in your ballot envelope, okay? So back in 2014, it was resolved to stagger the elections of the board members. So we have 11 positions that are elected to the board. There actually could be as many as 13 warm bodies in those 11 positions, because some of them are co-chairs. So anyway, so they resolved back in 2013 probably that rather than turning the board over completely once every 3 years, that about 1/3 of the board would be elected every year. This is a very common thing that is done in many organizations. So you get a nice continuity, you get people who've been on the board a while can help the new people. So there was a lot of language in the version that was created to cover this period in 2014 that, you know, kept referring to, well, it's 2014 and this will happen in 2015 and so on and so forth. And but we're way past Cheryl, that now.
Cheryl,
and, yes,
I can put up that document that just is a changed language, and that might help people see how awkward the old language was.
Yes, why didn't you do that? I'm not very good at screen sharing.
Yep.
So And because you know, so some people were elected only for 1 year, in order that they would that the new position would then be open for 3 years. So we're way past that now. We don't need to have a treasurer only for 1 year, and so on and so forth. So the terms of everybody who are elected to the board are 3 years. Okay, and in fact, our candidates today had to say in their application that I hope you have read on that website, that they, you know, agree to being around for 3 years and working for 3 years. So down there at the bottom is the old language that we said, no, we don't need that anymore. We need to clean that up and make it clear how it'll work from now onwards. So,
and here's the new language, which is
the new language. So your ballot, because it's cheaper for us to print in black and white and no color, all the changes are shown in bold. Okay, and so here is this is the actual thing is Roman numeral 5, leadership positions. Section A gives you the election timeline. So there's going to be a nominating committee, and at the very beginning of the year, the board takes up their position on the 1st of January, but they're elected, the election's happening here, you know, late in 2022, but the board is called the 2023 board, okay? And so the important part is item 4 there, you see. So we have, we lost it.
I'll put it back up. I was having.
So back in 2014, they divided up who would be elected each of the years in that 3-year progression. And so the issue is how to let you know, well, which is it, who's going to be elected this year, okay? And there are 2 ways of doing that. And in the bold down there, item little c, okay? So following from what we've decided, this is the way of showing it.
Excuse me, people can see it now. And I think you've made it pretty clear that we are changing this for this reason. And here is the language.
Right.
And what we have in front of us is sort of the mathematical approach, where it's very important that years are divisible by 3. Not everyone is comfortable with the mathematical approach, and we also have a chart that shows the way that works out. And I'd like to put up that chart as well for people to see.
So just you know, there's the formula, which is, you know, taking each character in the year, 2 + 2 + 2 for 2022 equals 6. That's divisible by 3. So this year, as you know, we're electing the treasurer and a program committee chair, and we would have liked to have elected a personnel committee chair and a membership development committee chair, but we're not, because nobody stood. So, but they all start in 2023, then towards the end of 2023, because it's 1 year later than 2022, then the next group of people will be elected. And then in the 3rd year, you'll see the president comes up in 2024, okay? So some of you don't like the math, so we have a table, a chart that now Darren will try to put up the chart that shows all these positions and which year they get to be elected.
I can put it up if you want, Darren.
Actually, I was under the happy illusion that I had it up, and I have it right here. So thank you, though, Barbara. I appreciate that. I thought it was up all along. Okay, so I do want to jump in and see if people in the Zoom meeting have any questions about this pretty straightforward bylaws amendment which
Why
sim-
don't you put up the pros and cons page so people can get the sense of why we're talking about this, even though we're not changing how we do our elections?
Okay, I see a hand raised. Teresa, are you wanting to ask a question about the bylaws amendment?
Yes. To try to understand what happens, like there are several open board seats, and I understand the staggered thing. But for instance, on the 2 board seats that are open, like membership development committee chair, if the term starts in January 2023 and no one runs for the seat until the fall of 2023, when they take the position in the January of 2024, would there only be 2 years left on the term?
Yes.
Right.
Is that the way it works?
The chart gives you a really good example, a really good view of what we did when we staggered. The 3-year staggering happens even if somebody is not filling one of those years. It's the staggering, it stays in place. So that if a position opens 22, 23, 24, but nobody fills it in 22, but somebody fills it in 23, they're only in 23 and 24. And then in 25, there's a new one. And when you get your packet at home, you'll see how the staggering shows that it's the positions that are staggered and people fill those positions, if that makes any sense.
And earlier, Teresa, I think you weren't here when we talked about the fact that these people can be an appointment by the board to ask a person to take on that position.
Right. An interim position.
Mm-hmm.
So
we were always asked to do pros and cons when there is a bylaws amendment. And so anyway.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick out there into 2022, 2023, you can see that the terms don't change whether they're filled or not. They start and end. And here are the pros and cons. And Eileen Kokoski had a question. Eileen?
Perhaps you started to answer my question already. If someone has a term that's only 1 year and they officially run, can they run 2 more times for the 3 years? In other words, conceivably do 7-year stretches or 8 years?
Actually, the bylaws are pretty clear that a person may only serve for 6 years at a time on the board. We haven't had a situation where someone served a year, served 3 years when reelected, and then decided to run again. So there would be some interpretation needed, but I would think that they could serve for another 2 years, but then the position would have to be up for election or appointment.
Darian, would you put back the chart for a second? Because I think you and I would have had some conversations about this. If, say, any one of those boxes that has, say, starting in 22, if you could stop moving it, because everybody's going to get sick to their stomachs if it keeps flashing. Anything that starts in 2022, year 1, which is gray, and then year 2, year 3. So, or the ones, if somebody winds up in 2023, we're going to ask some people to serve on an interim basis for the calendar year 2023 into January of 2024. If they really liked the job, they can run for the job for however many years are left out of the 3 years that they have slotted into. So if 2023, somebody steps in as a membership development chair, That's the first of 3 years. They would serve as that, as an appointed position by the board. But if they really loved it, they could then run for the remainder of the 2 years remaining on that 3-year slot. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Yes.
So the point is that this staggering of elections was already in the bylaws, but with language that was talking about something 2014. So all this amendment does is tidy up the actual language without actually changing the way it will work. And so the pros and cons are, it was difficult to find some cons. So.
Yeah, but Cheryl, I think the question that's being raised is a good one. A lot of our members didn't understand how staggered elections worked at all. They still are going to work exactly the same way as they've worked since 2014. We're just now talking about them. And people who weren't around in 2012 when all this was going on hadn't seen this chart. It wasn't on the website. And Diane's desire to have the language of the staggered election scheme cleaned gives us an opportunity to talk about how this has worked going forward.
And I think we should emphasize that through the wonders of modern technology, this chart will now be linked in the bylaws to the part where it discusses the staggered elections. Okay.
Yeah.
Can I expand on my question? Barbara,
Yes.
you and maybe somebody else has perhaps been involved in the position, a position. In your case, you were chair of the finance committee in the past. Have you done that more than one time?
Oh, okay. So this is the deal. As far as I am concerned, and we've always talked about back since 2008, the most that you could run is 2 terms for your 3-year position. And then, however, Darian has been of the opinion that you couldn't then run for a new position for a 3rd set of 3 years. I don't think the board has ever really discussed that, and we haven't discussed it as a whole membership either. Certainly, Jan Quarterman was 3 years treasurer, a second 3 years treasurer, and she is now termed out. Shilpa Pandey, 3 years membership development, 3 years membership development, and she is termed out, both of them in those positions. But we never really addressed the issue of, could they have said, I love being on the board so much, I want to serve a 3-year position as a personnel chair, or in another role, in other words. And we really have only talked about it kind of in passing in the bylaws committee. And a question remains, is it good for someone to serve on the board for 3 years, I mean, for 6 years or more than 6 years? Darian, as president, will get to serve a 7th year after this term 3 years ends, because she will be an ex officio past president, which gets that is a position on the board. So right. that position is a 7th year, but we really haven't asked the question, is it healthy? Is it a burnout? Is it wonderful for someone who's served 6 years, in other words, 2 3-year terms, to be able to run for consecutively for another 3-year period for a different position? And I don't know the answer to that, although I see Nancy Parker's hand is up.
So there is another question, and we're nearing the end of our time. So Nancy Price.
You're muted, Nancy.
Yes, thank you very much. I just wanted to ask, we have never considered the role of an advisory board, and it might be a way that people who would like to keep serving in some sort of advisory capacity, that rather than running for an office because of these issues of terms, that we might consider forming an advisory board, and people like that could then be on the advisory board, and we would benefit from their experience, their insights, their etc. Thank you.
But if we have open board positions, wouldn't we be better off having their experience and interest and expertise serving in a different position as a board member if they wanted to do that?
However,
that's a question. That's a question.
An advisory board would not necessarily have the responsibilities of board members and could be a very different creature.
Sure.
I want to briefly address a couple questions in the chat. What positions other than the president could have two members serving together? The only other position that currently allows co-positions is the development chair. And in both the case of the president and the development chair, those positions are potentially so big and complex that it's good to have co-chairs. With program, instead of co-chairs for these big and complex positions, because of the nature of program being divided among different issue committees, it's more practical to have two program chairs, and they don't have to necessarily be co's.
No, they're not co. They don't share a vote. That's the big deal.
Right, that's the difference.
Right,
I was going to say.
votes. Also,
yes,
Joan, did you have a question about that? I was going to move on to another question in the chat.
No, I just want to get back to Nancy's thing in the chat, which is what I think you're doing. Thank you.
Oh, okay. And then Sue
I was
Hilton,
waving my hand in dismay. I'm sorry, not to get your attention. I beg your pardon, everybody.
Sue Hilton asked, what about when a position is vacant? Might there be an election for the position in an off year? Exactly. This year, when we advertised for candidates, we advertised not only for those whose terms would regularly be up for election this year, which in this case were treasurer and membership development chair, as well as program chair, but also we advertise for the positions that are currently vacant. And if someone had been appointed to one of those positions, the position would still be up for election because that person to retain the position would have to run for election. And then Sue Hilton asks about can they get back on the board after a break? Well, obviously, maybe not obviously, I was on the board back until about 2007, and then I was off a number of years. Barbara has been on and off the board several times. So I see those questions. I am looking for other questions that might be there.
So what I'd like to say is there is so Diane and I and Barbara and Darian and Margot have been an ad hoc bylaws committee, okay, this past 10 months. And so this is interesting questions that are coming up about, could somebody, for example, because the bylaws are mute on that. The bylaws are mute on, can somebody serve 6 years in one position and immediately run for another one? So if you're really interested in having input on that question and helping the ad hoc committee, work through it and find a new bylaw to add, then you should write to Darian and tell her you'd like to be on the ad hoc bylaws committee.
Great.
And moving back to the questions in the chat, I did intend to ask Nancy's earlier. This is a question for you, George, to please briefly describe how you view the relation of WILF US to WILF International. For example, the Earth Democracy Committee has benefited greatly from our relationship with International's Environmental Working Group. And I would add that WILF US and the Earth Democracy Committee are both benefiting, that currently WILF US member Cindy Peister is part of the international delegation to COP27. And I'll just give her a plug that on the news I hear on Pacifica Radio this evening, they mentioned that they quoted Cindy Peister, that she got a soundbite. So yay team. So George, what's your view on the relationship between International and WILPF US?
Well, we're part of International, and our mission and vision and goals is also an expression of International to an extent. And when possible that we can collaborate on projects, events, and actions, we absolutely should. When we talk about having messaging, that we need international support around messaging, even if it's around US policy, if we need support, we can go and should have relationships strong enough with the international sections that they can back us and we can back them. That may mean relationship building that we have not yet done, but we're up to it.
Thank you very much.
And then I'm putting an answer in the chat right now to a question from Joan Goddard about questions after we get the ballot packet. There is information included in the ballot packet on how to get questions answered. So basically, you can email me or possibly Diane, that is president@wilpfus.org or secretary@wilpfus.org. And I also will add that traditionally, well, actually properly, according to our bylaws, the nominating committee would be the ones handling those questions. Unfortunately, one of the positions currently vacant on the board is the chair of the nominating committee. And similarly vacant are the members of the nominating committee. So we are looking forward to people expressing interest in the nominating committee.
Also personnel.
Yes, well, there are a number of openings and they were all listed in the e-alerts that were circulated. Okay, we are about to wind down. I see no questions.
Robin has a question.
Oh, I beg your pardon.
What is our connection out to Peace Development Fund?
Thank you. Yes, I saw that one and forgot to ask it. Diane, you probably know as well as any of us the relationship with the Peace Development Fund. Could you explain that?
Oh, I was interested in what, I just, no, I mean, they collect money for us. It's kind of like but that's more of a treasury type thing. And
okay,
they're called a fiscal sponsor. They're called our fiscal sponsor.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that for a minute.
Well, I think it's pretty straightforward. And we are just about to wrap up. I'll just say that they are our fiscal sponsor. They're the organization that makes it possible for us to get tax deductible donations, which are then used only for educational purposes. So Robin, if you wanted to elaborate any on your question or ask further details, this is your opportunity. We'd be happy to hear from you.
Okay, well, I just remember we had a sort of more intimate relationship with Peace Development Fund, and they helped us, they advised us, and there was this wonderful woman, I forget her name now, who came to different congresses from Peace Development Fund. They were nurturing us. They wanted us to thrive. And so has that passed completely, or, I mean,
no.
So you're saying we only have a sort of fiscal relationship now?
No, I don't believe that's the case at all. In fact, I'm looking forward to meeting with there is another woman who took the place of the one who retired. They have been giving us advice. Jan Quarterman has been getting advice, and the finance committee has been getting advice from Peace Development Fund on ways in which we can maximize our investments and be prudent about doing so. And I hopefully will be having more interaction with them that our membership even will know about. They're an excellent fiscal sponsor. Certainly nothing is the same as it was when years ago we had Jane Addams Peace Association as our fiscal sponsor, but Peace Development Fund has been very good to us.
Thank you very much, Barbara Nielsen, who's the candidate for Treasurer and Finance Committee Chair. Thank you to George Friday, who's the candidate for Program Chair. Both of these are 3-year terms coming up. You'll be getting your ballots in the mail any day now. The other item on the ballot is the bylaws amendment, which you've heard quite a bit about, and you can find more information on the candidates and the bylaws amendment in your ballot packet and on the website that maybe, Cheryl, could you put that link in the website, in the chat one more time? That's where you'll find additional documents on all 2 candidates and on the bylaws amendment. So thank you also to Cheryl and to Diane Blay for being available tonight to help with this program. And thank you to all of you who have attended and shown interest in WILPF-US. We are going to be looking for more people to be on the board. If you have suggestions for folks you think would be good in the open positions, I know I'd be happy to hear from you. So I invite in turn each of our speakers tonight to say good night in alphabetical order by first name. So Barbara.
Thank you everyone for participating in WILPF and making WILPF stronger and also being here tonight.
Cheryl.
Yes, thank you everybody, and let it rain more in California.
Diane.
Yes, thank you. And I just want to put a plug in for what I recommended for the bylaws committee, is that instead of 3-year terms, we have 2-year terms because we have elections every year. Why not have just 2-year terms? Because 3 years is sometimes a little, hard to commit to. And 2 years is easier. Plus that makes the bylaws easier. You just say, these are, elected in odd years, these and even, and it would be so easy. So I was recommending that, and I'm still going to recommend it for as long as I breathe, I think.
We have triennial congresses.
But we have elections every year.
Okay, so here's a good reason for people to think about being on the bylaws committee. You can see it's a lively committee with heated discussions and yet very courteous and nonviolent. And George, I haven't forgotten you.
Well, at least I know I can get a laugh with y'all, because that was pretty funny, Diane. Great to be with you this evening. Really nice to have some good energy coming off of the last couple of days, and hang in there. We can get through things.
Thank you, George. Thank you, Barbara, for running for the board. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight, and have a good night all.
Hold on a second. I'm saving the chat. Don't go away.
And thank you, Darian.
Yes, thank you, Darian, very much. And everybody who put this on.
And we'll get this up on the WILPF recordings page as soon as Ellen Thomas can do it. Thanks all.
Right.
You.
Save the chat. This is your final chance.
Yeah.
And good to see so many people's faces who are familiar and who are not familiar.